Hello, passengers, co-pilots, shotgun callers, blunderbuss bellowers, and midnight riders. Welcome to another episode of Full Moon, Empty Road. As always, my name's Jeremy, and I'll be your driver tonight. Hope everyone had a great week, and hope you're ready for another road trip. This time we're headed up north to 14 West 10th Street in Greenwich Village, New York, to a place dubbed the House of Death. So get in, buckle up, grab the rock salt, and let's ride. The House of Death. Hell of a name for a place. Hope you're ready for some history and hauntings, and maybe we can turn this death house into a death home. Unless, of course, someone already beat us to it. The House of Death is a Greek revivalist brownstone. Pretty sure that's actually what the Drish House was in the last episode. I think it was built in the same fashion. Beautiful to look at, looking through all the, during my research, looking at all the pictures and stuff, is an absolutely gorgeous house. Not so pleasant history on this place. The history of the place says that it saw 22 different people die in the home. One of its earliest residents was the wife of the founder of the Metropolitan Underground Railroad and the Broadway Underground Railroad, Mr. James Borman Johnston. After Johnston died, his wife and their two daughters moved into the place in the 1880s. The Borman family didn't really report anything. They didn't really have any issues living there. I've noted them on here because they are one of the first prominent families to live in the place. After they left, a new owner moved in, and that's when strange things really started to happen. Now that could have been due to the house and its history, or could just be, maybe it was just an unlucky house, maybe, or maybe just some unlucky people found themselves as residents there. In 1897, celebrity cyclist Fred H. Andrew, he had what was described as an unlucky moment, very, very unlucky. During his residency, as described in the New York Times of August 9th, 1897, Andrew had a moment of reckless bicycle riding. It caused him to hit a boy that was around 8 years old, and the boy suffered a broken leg, and Andrew was in turn arrested. So yeah, I don't know if that was just one of those things that just either happened, unlucky for Mr. Andrew, or if there is some sort of cloud that hangs over this house or something. I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's one of those things. There definitely does seem to be a cloud that hangs over the place, because now that's just one of the first reported incidents, but now there are things as we go along in this episode that and people have seen stuff there over time where it's had such a prominent history. But just the things that have happened to people makes you kind of wonder if it's just an unlucky building or if it's just a string of unlucky tenants. Another resident of note, of pretty renowned note, was world famous author Mark Twain. And he lived in the house for about a year. Twain did die in Connecticut, but it is said that he returned to the house. And sightings of the author in a white suit have been reported on the first floor and near the staircase. The staircase seems like it was a hot spot for the hauntings and whatnot in this house. In the 1930s, a mother and daughter said they saw a ghost resembling Twain sitting near a window. And when they saw him, and from the stories, very plain as day, they were like, "Hey, who are you and what are you doing here?" And he said, "My name is Samuel Clemens, and I have a problem here I've got to settle." And that's a quote. A few years after this sighting, the single-family home was converted into a 10-unit apartment building. It was a huge place, so it was, they converted into apartments. And according to the Post, actress Jan Bryant Bartell and her husband moved in 1957 into an apartment on the top floor of 14 West 10th Street. So they moved into one of the units that was, one of the apartment buildings within the place in 1957. And Bartell noted saying that she felt a monstrous moving shadow that loomed up behind her. And Martell actually wrote a memoir, and the memoir was titled Spindrift. And she had actually written and published it years after she had left the home. She wrote about feeling a brush against the back of her neck and smelling a rotting odor throughout her apartment. Kind of makes you think of Amityville Horror, because I think that was one of the, aside from the pig-like creature and the wall, I think the walls bled or oozed a black kind of substance. I don't remember what it was. That might actually be something fun to cover, even though everybody's heard the story of the Amityville haunting, but that might be something for me to put my voice to one of these days. But she noticed a rotting odor throughout her apartment, and one day she saw a vision of a man, and she reached out to touch him. She wrote that she touched a substance without substance, chilly, damp, diaphanous as marsh mist or cloud of ether. Bartell and her husband called a paranormal expert and a medium to investigate the place. The medium said they felt something, or many things, dead under the floorboards, possibly a young girl, an aborted child, and a small gray cat. After unsuccessfully cleansing the home of any nasty spirits, the couple left the home. So I guess one of those things, well, if there's something here, let's cleanse it. And then, as it turns out, it didn't work, so let's just get out of Dodge. I can't say I blame them on that. If I was noticing odd smells and being brushed on the back or any of that stuff, I would want to move too. Years later, an actual monster resided at the House of Death. This was November 2nd, 1987. I was 3 days old. The house made headlines in the death of Lisa Nussbaum. The story goes, in November of 1987, former attorney Joel Steinberg beat his partner's 6-year-old daughter into a coma and later beat her to death. Steinberg was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and later landed mandatory parole in 2004. The Post reported last that Steinberg is currently living in an apartment in Harlem, and now that's been almost 20 years ago, so he may be dead by now. I didn't actually look into him. But here's the story, courtesy of the website nyghosts.com. Around 6:40 a.m., 911 operators got a pressing call from children's author and editor Hedda Nussbaum. She said that her 6-year-old daughter Lisa wasn't breathing, so an ambulance was sent to her Greenwich residence right away. When the paramedics arrived, they were greeted by a very, very disturbing scene. They found Lisa lying naked and unresponsive on the kitchen floor, and her brother Mitchell tied to a playpen and soaked in his own urine. Nussbaum herself was covered with bruises and had several broken bones. Investigators also discovered marijuana, cocaine, hash, over 20 crack pipes, and $25,000 in the apartment. Paramedics were regrettably unable to revive little Lisa Nussbaum on their way to the hospital. Later, her autopsy revealed her cause of death was repeated blunt force trauma to the skull. Hedda Nussbaum and lawyer Joel Steinberg, Lisa's father, were both arrested and subsequently charged with first-degree murder. It was charged that that after a cocaine binge, Joel Steinberg violently abused both Lisa and his wife. Hedda Nussbaum avoided charges in exchange for testimony against Joel. A jury found him guilty of manslaughter in the second degree and sentenced him to a prison sentence. I'm assuming, since this, let's see, when did I say this took place? 1987. So he got out in 2004. Was that 24 years? Or no? 16 years. Upon his release in 2004, Joel Steinberg left the law and took construction jobs. Like the mansion in the Amityville Horror, the House of Death, seems like it became its own residence of a real-life monster. The happenings of the House of Death also seem to spread to neighboring houses on the street as well. In the apartment complex next door, residents started to notice flickering lights. Several residents, reported a ghostly female figure in a long gown wandering a corridor, and a resident photographer had apparently seen her float through doors for more than 20 different years. Well, 20, I don't know why I said it that way. More than 20 years. Moving back to Jan Bryant Bartell, she had actually lived in the next door unit, Unit 16, before moving into 14. And before moving into Unit 14, Bartell reported seeing apparitions, hearing strange sounds, and just feeling a general sense of dread. Now, by the time she did move into it, it was no longer just a single family house. It was already apartments. So they're describing it as 14 West 10th Street, but I think the way they are describing it is the different units within the building. But it definitely does seem like the entire house had something going on with it, had some kind of something hanging over it. Now, currently the building is privately owned, and to this day the stairwell does seem to continue to be the centerpiece of the hauntings of the house. You remember they were, in the past people had stated seeing Mark Twain around the staircase, a small girl and stuff like that. Numerous paranormal investigators and teams have been into the house and reported seeing a lady dressed in white, a small child, and a gray cat. And that kind of takes you back to when Jan Bryant Bartell had the medium in the house, and they said something about a woman, a small child, and a cat being buried under the house. So interesting to see that there is also reports of sightings of that. This house has an absolutely storied history. I actually looked up a list. I was going to try and note the different deaths that took place in the house. I couldn't, because now earlier in the episode, it was stated that there were 22 different people that died in the house, but I couldn't really find a list of who had passed away in the place. So mostly all I could find were the prominent people that lived there, like the cyclist that had an accident that hurt the young boy, or the actress, or Joel Steinberg, the monster that he is. I couldn't imagine beating a child to death, and I definitely couldn't imagine a mother just allowing that to happen. I can honestly tell you, I've got 2 kids, and if I ever just no, I wouldn't, because now I'm not I'm not the type of person to go on any kind of bender or binge or anything, unless it's like a Netflix binge or something like that. But if I went on something like that and beat one of our kids to death, I guarantee you, Anna wouldn't just be sitting in a chair when I got home. Or not when I got home, but whenever the first responders arrived. Nah, she'd have killed me, as she should have. Reading through this, honestly, it pisses me off that Joel Steinberg got out on or got released in 2004. I mean, Lisa's brother was found, I think it said tied. Let me go back here. Yeah, her brother Mitchell tied to a playpen and soaked in his own urine. Now, as far as I can tell, Lisa was the only one that died from this. But I mean, 6 years old, and you're gonna beat a child to death, reportedly from repeated blunt force trauma to the head. Joel Steinberg, if you're still alive and you run across this, I want you to know you are a piece of garbage. I'd say things a lot worse than this, but I have a couple of young listeners, my son being one of them, and a friend of mine's daughter that's about his same age being another. But you're a piece of work, dude. You should have died in prison. Beating a 6-year-old child to death. Boy, I hope that if you're still alive, and I should have done the research. If you're still alive, I hope that haunts you every day. I really do. Both of you, honestly. You and Hedda. Hope it haunts y'all both. No sense in that. No excuse for it. As for the cyclist, I hate it for him because he was out riding. I wonder what they mean by reckless riding. Because, I mean, was he really being reckless? Or maybe the bicycle just got away from him? I know as a kid riding bikes, every now and then you'd go, I don't know, maybe he was going downhill or something and couldn't stop in time. I don't know. It didn't really go into his story from where I looked, and I did my research through about three different places, but nyghost.com was definitely the main contributor to this episode, because they had the story, the actual, I guess the from the Post. The newspaper, that is, the Post, not something posted online, because this was back in 1987. And so, it was, and the House of Death was actually just a kind of a last second decision for me today. Because I originally wanted to do something about like ghost towns or cursed towns or something like that, to see if there were any in America. I think of like the Jonestown murders or the lost city of Roanoke or something like that. But everything I found was just like towns that had cropped up during the gold rush, and once the gold rush died down, they were abandoned. Nothing really too much on the haunted side of things. So I was like, let me see because I haven't really done anything up in the Northeast yet. So I kind of started digging through different haunted places in the Northeast, and ran across, I saw the name The House of Death. I was like, hey, that's a pretty interesting little name. So I did some reading on it, and to find that, like, number one, Mark Twain's ghost hangs around saying, I got stuff I got to do. I got work to do, playa. So I thought, that sounds like pretty good. I did not realize, because I had heard Joel Steinberg's name before. I didn't recognize it. I just knew I'd heard it before. and didn't realize that he was the centerpiece of that. So definitely some interesting stories, and definitely some storied histories to the place. Jan Bryant Bartell basically having her own Amityville horror happen, that was interesting. I know for a fact that if anything like what happened to her happened, especially that's noted in her memoir, may actually pick that up and give that a read, if that's got all of this stuff about what happened to her in units 14 and 16 of the House of Death. But I couldn't imagine living in a place where number one, she touched something that didn't really have a substance but was a substance, almost like a cloud of ether. I could not. That'd make my skin crawl. The smelling, rotting odors throughout the house. Once I started smelling something rot, I immediately think Amityville Horror, and I'm like, all right, time to leave. I don't know if they actually, if the Lutz family, when they lived in the house in Amityville, actually smelled any sort of rotting odor, because as Seth Andrews describes it in his podcast about ghost stories, the accounts are dubious at best, outright lies at worst. But so this ended up taking place of what I had planned to do, and the research was definitely interesting, but just some of the things that happened, I just can't believe it. So I'll have a Q&A on this, and let me know what you think about the place. You can hit up the Q&A section. It is also on Spotify down below the actual play button. There's a little section where you'll see the question I've asked, and you can reply there. If you do have Anchor, you can reply on Anchor, and I think you can even send voice messages to me to say, hey, what about checking this place out? Something like that. You can find me on Facebook at Full Moon Empty Road. You can find me at TikTok, same thing, Full Moon Empty Road. I am looking into making an Instagram and a Twitter for the page. Not really sure, so I guess Twitter and Instagram coming soon. I say not really sure, but I think I am going to do that, and just, I guess, any extra marketing will help. But thank you so much for listening today. Listener support is on. Host read ads are live now. I'm actually, right after I get done recording this, I'm going to go in and record my host read ad. So hope you enjoyed the story today. You can find the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. I still haven't heard back from Apple to get that one going. And so yeah, let's and drop me a line at fullmoonemptyroad@gmail.com. So just one more time, Full Moon Empty Road on Facebook, on TikTok. Podcast available on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Twitter and Instagram will be coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you again for taking this ride with me. Let's go home.